At the end of World War II, two nations emerged as global superpowers from the conflict: the United States and the Soviet Union. And though they had been allies during the war, that had primarily been the result of an even more threatening enemy. With the war's end and the successful victory of the Allies, the natural divisions of the United States and the Soviet Union came back to the surface. The United States, a capitalistic democratic nation, and the Soviet Union, essentially a communistic dictatorship, were too much unalike to get along. And the competition and misunderstandings that dominated the era afterwards led to what comes to be known as the Cold War. The Soviet Union, over the past 150 years, had been devastatingly invaded from the West, by Napoleon Bonaparte first, by the Kaiser's armies in World War I, and by Adolf Hitler's Nazis in World War II. Almost understandably, they wanted to create an area of buffer, a safety zone between the hostile West and themselves, and therefore called for a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. They were going to leave the tanks in the countries that they had liberated. This area will be known as the Warsaw Pact region in the years that came to follow. The United States, fighting for democracy, for freedom, for self-determination, didn't understand this Soviet desire for self-protection and saw this acquisition of territories as part of a Soviet plan to dominate the planet, and therefore set themselves up as the opposition to this, forming groups of cooperative nations later on, like NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, aimed at containing Soviet power. The two nations, ideologically different, develop along similar lines in the years after the war, both of them maintaining largely a wartime footing in terms of military spending, both of them looking to take advantage of the weakness of others in international politics, moving into regions that previously they hadn't been interested in Central Asia, in East Asia, in Africa. And the conflict that continued after this point developed in a variety of ways. Both countries stood against each other in terms of lending support and moral power to developing nations. Also, fighting through surrogates. Both countries sponsored others who shared their ideological beliefs. And finally, indirect confrontation. For the United States, this took place during the 1950s in the Korean War.